Are you questioning if someone that you are in love with could be on the spectrum of narcissism? And are you concerned because maybe you're even in a relationship with someone who is narcissistic? And are you an empath? Are you someone who leans in? And are you codependent? All of these things we're going to discuss. And the beauty of this podcast is going to be, yes, there are ways to heal this. And I'm excited to share what I have learned throughout many years of being a spiritual life coach and a mentor to many. And I've seen healing happen. I am Karena, Virginia, and this is the Karena, Virginia podcast, where we expect the best and we get it. So welcome. I want to start with a story about myself. When I was a child, first of all, I'm first generation American. My mom was born in England and she moved to New York City in her 20s. And my father was born in Rome, Italy, and he moved to New York City in his 20s. They had 3 kids. My brother was born in New York City. When he was 18 months old, I was born in New York City. And we moved out to the suburbs, and we were a very different family for sure. We were European, living in the suburbs of New York, where there was a lot of Wonder Bread and Skippy peanut butter and Welch's grape jelly sandwiches. And we were eating sardines and eggplant parmesan on crusty Italian bread that Dad brought home from Little Italy, where he worked. And when I was 3.5, my mother had my sister, and my mom nursed my sister for at least 3 years. And I remember it. I remember it very well. And I always wondered why my sister had that special time with my mom. And my mother told me that I used to bite her when she was nursing me. And so she stopped nursing me early. And I always believed that I was the bad girl and my sister was the good one. And I went to school and I acted out. And in kindergarten, I don't like to play victim of things. I've done a lot of healing on myself, but I did have a horrible kindergarten teacher, and she adored my brother. And then when she got me, she didn't know what to do with me. And my maiden name is Ferrari. And so when she got another Ferrari, being Karena Ferrari, she just assumed it would be this very well-behaved child. And she got me. And I used to break crayons. And I do remember that part of the reason I broke them was because I wanted to be able to use the red one while someone else wanted to use the red one. And it was the way that I shared. But you can't explain that when you're 5. So I would have to go into the corner, and then she would ignore me, and she would make me feel like I was invisible. And I remember this. And a few years ago, my mother actually told me that one of the volunteer moms came to my mom's house and knocked on the door and said, "I want to let you know that Mrs. Plock is ignoring Karena." And Karena raises her hand and she jumps up and down, and Mrs. Plock pretends that she doesn't see her. And I've seen this numerous times. And when my mom told me this, I said, "Mom, what did you do?" And my mom said, "Oh, nothing. You have to understand. I was English. We did nothing. We didn't do anything. I just, I wasn't going to say anything to your teacher." So I continued to go back to school that way. And at the same time, I had this little sister that was home with mom that was breastfeeding, and she was the good girl, and I was getting in trouble. I was the bad girl. So throughout my life, this has been an ongoing belief system. These imprints from our childhood are so ingrained. And when I was a child and said, Mommy, why didn't I get to breastfeed or nurse? My mom would say, you bit me. You bit me. You had 2 teeth so early and you bit me. And I said, that's enough. And then you wanted a bottle for too long. And when you were 2, I said, no more bottle. And for about a year, you said, Mommy, why you throw my baba in the garbage? And all of this just brought up so much for me as a child and as an adult, having this conversation with my mother, who I love so dearly. And I recognize grew up with very high standards in England with a very strict father. And I know my mother loves the 3 of her kids and really did the best that she could, being an immigrant with her whole entire family, still living in England, raising 3 children with a husband who worked many hours in New York. And I don't feel any sadness around that anymore. I do feel a lot of anger for any teacher that dismisses a child, and I am a huge advocate for children, especially those that act out. And that is going to bring me to something I have honed over the years. And I was just telling my amazing podcast producer who's here with me as I'm recording, which is so nice to have, that I was an acting major in college and I pursued an acting career. And I did think about going back to school for psychology. And I ended up becoming a life coach and a spiritual mentor instead, but I've studied it all. So I really have. And I know all about the different personality disorders. I also really understand those of us that are the ones that are highly sensitive, and we lean in and we become the people pleasers and we keep the peace, and what it is like in relationships, and how we, as the ones that lean in, are often very drawn to the people that take very good care of themselves and have very solid boundaries. So this is what we're going to talk about. There's so much buzz around narcissistic personality disorder. And is it a real thing? Of course it is. It's also very close to borderline personality disorder, and sometimes they're not as easy to distinguish. They're also both disorders that are kind of shiny on the outside, and on the inside, they are these disorders that bring up so much shame, sometimes deep self-loathing, inadequacy, deep insecurity, and a lot of pain. But what we see are these shiny beings, sometimes very grandiose, sometimes extremely charming, so compelling, and extremely magnetic. Now, when there is a magnetic force, what happens? Boom, we go right there. It's like, what a magnet does. It slaps right into what it is drawing. So if there's metal and a magnet, there's going to be a force that brings them together. If there's an empath, and someone that is more on the narcissistic scale, there is a magnetic force. This is quantum physics, and there's so much to it, but I'm not going to go into that right now. What I want to discuss is what happens when we are in one of those relationships, and can someone who is highly narcissistic heal? And if you go to AI, you're going to see the answer absolutely not. Because I've looked, I've researched it, and it's because what I believe in a spiritual way is that what AI is picking up is data that's there. What AI is not picking up is this incredible force of the heavens opening up right now, and what is being channeled through, and what we are receiving as the highly sensitive ones. So if you are someone who is considered an empath, and you are being told that the person you are in relationship with, or that you are in love with or highly attracted to, can't change, I would say rethink that. But before I even say that, it is essential for those of us that are more sensitive, those of us that lean in, those of us that are porous and feel things so deeply, that want to keep the peace around us in order to feel safe. It is essential that we do the healing work on ourselves as well. Because if we don't heal the codependent part of ourselves, that can come from, first of all, being born as porous and sensitive beings, or receiving that limiting belief from childhood that we are bad and that we need to be perfect in order to be loved, or having those situations where our needs were not met as children, we are going to find that not having our needs met and rescuing another in order to prove our value feels somewhat comfortable to us. It feels somewhat like it's what we're used to. And there's also a sense of the challenge. Can I rescue this person? Can I actually be the one that heals this person? And this is very important, because if we do not heal ourselves, we are feeding the beast. And I'll say that again. If we don't heal ourselves, we are feeding the beast. So if you are someone who is already out of a relationship with someone who's on the narcissistic spectrum, or someone with narcissistic personality disorder, please don't take this as a form of me saying that you could have fixed it. You did what you needed to do, and you did the right thing. And this is not for you. This is for those who are intuitively questioning, not from a place of being so dismissed and so afraid and being so manipulated that they are in pain and are sabotaging their own lives, but from a place of an inkling, an intuitive knowing that there is a way that through the heart and through love and through recognizing a very wounded part of that person who is on the narcissistic spectrum, that there is a possibility for healing. And again, this podcast is about expecting the best and getting it. And if your best is that you moved on or that you are going to move on, that's your best. And you know, because the answers are within you. So I also want to say that if you are in a situation where you are thinking about going into therapy, marriage counseling, or partners therapy with someone who is more on the narcissistic spectrum, it is essential that you work with someone who understands the compelling magnetism of this type of personality and how they can charm their therapist into believing that you are the one at fault. And if you're with a therapist who doesn't have the energy to recognize what's going on or does not have the skills to recognize what is going on, maybe that their specialty is eating disorders or their specialty is some, addictions or something totally different, change therapists. There are amazing therapists out there who are able to pick up on the way that a narcissist uses manipulative tactics to compel and charm. So there's the accommodator, and then there's the, I want to say, highly selfish or narcissistic. Again, there's a spectrum, or narcissistic personality disorder. Someone who's an accommodator has a lot of empathy to the point where we will feel things so strongly and to the point of feeling pain. And someone who has a more self-absorbed nature will lack that empathy. And a true sociopath has no empathy. So we are not talking about sociopaths here, and we're not even talking about people that are on the extreme of narcissist personality disorder. We're talking about where there can be a healing so that someone who is on that spectrum is able to tune into their empathy again. So when we're dealing with someone who is highly self-absorbed and we really care about them, sometimes the only way that we can help them to heal and that we can stay in a relationship with them without it being highly toxic and stay in the relationship with them and create a healthy relationship is by not second guessing ourselves when we need to say no. And by not second guessing ourselves when we need to put up very strong boundaries. Because just like a child, if we enable selfish people to continue to be selfish, they will. If we say no, and that person does care enough about keeping the relationship alive, we are giving that person an opportunity to do the work that they need to do to heal. And that means that Sometimes we need to say, I need time away. This is not working for me. And we need to allow that person to hit rock bottom, because the breakthrough happens from the breakdown. And the only way that the breakthrough can happen for someone who has been so accommodated in that narcissistic way is for us to draw such a strong boundary where they are propelled into doing the work. Otherwise, they won't change. And if we don't do the work on healing ourselves and recognizing why we put up or why we have put up with certain mechanisms and why we have abandoned ourselves to keep other people happy, then we will continue to enable them and we will continue to keep the peace. And if we are people that are in a marriage with children, sometimes it's about keeping the family together and not having enough confidence in ourselves to do what's needed to be done. And this way of saying no and allowing the narcissistic personality to hit rock bottom so that they can have a breakthrough is the best way that we can love ourselves and our partner and our family and our children. If we keep the peace because we are so caught up in that cycle of second guessing ourselves, and because we have been constantly shamed, put down, in a way emotionally and even spiritually abused, and that we believe all of those comments that come at us to keep us small, we won't have the courage to do what needs to be done to keep this type of relationship together and alive. We won't. And that is a recipe for a very toxic dynamic and a very toxic relationship and a very toxic family environment. The miracle is that people will treat us how we expect to be treated. And when we do the work on ourselves and we recognize that we are kind of swimming in these muddy waters because we've allowed certain tactics to work on us, when we get to that point of healing and getting out on the other side, miracles happen. Miracles happen. And sometimes the relationships don't work, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. So is there the potential? Is there the opportunity for healing to happen? Can people change? I believe people can change. I've seen people change. And I do believe that we have to change in order to allow the miracle to happen as well. And it doesn't mean that we have to fight and that we have to get angry and that we have to blow up. It doesn't mean we can't. We just do what we feel called and aligned to do. To thine own self be true. There really isn't a right or a wrong in this. And we're all so different. So however we need to show up for ourselves is key. But the enabling of that pattern and the keeping the peace is not the solution, because that will never work and it will just circle downward. In order for it to spiral upward, we must heal the codependency. We must heal the accommodation part of us. We must heal the rescuing part of ourselves, the people pleasing part of ourselves, and get to a point of understanding where it comes from. We don't need to know exactly, but the root cause of it, because once we understand the root cause, we can clear the energy around it. So everything is energy. Even that magnetism and that driving force that brings the selfish and sometimes very wounded to the selfless and often very wounded as well into that magnetic attraction. That force is so powerful that when we heal, that force can still be alive, but the dynamic changes. And we have to trust that sometimes, just as we're drawn to that more self-absorbed, shiny personality because we want so much to know what it feels like to love ourselves, they're drawn to our empathy and they're drawn to our ability to really care. And they want that too. And when they hit rock bottom, they know what it feels like to feel. And there's no more numbing out. Sometimes if that type of personality is also addicted to a form of numbing out, they might bottom out to the point where they find something like the 12 steps or some kind of amazing counselor or coach or therapist that can really assist them in coming out of that darkness. And for us, there are so many tools. There are communities of people that are really doing the work to overcome codependency. And I'm going to talk next time about the reason I believe spiritually that this is happening so much, and I'm seeing it more and more and more. I'm going to be discussing this in the next podcast. So please stay tuned. And again, I want to reinforce that this is not a podcast for someone who is in an abusive relationship. If you are in an abusive relationship, please get professional help. And this is not a podcast for someone who has a severe mental illness and is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and has no intentions of getting any better. If you are in a relationship with someone like that, please know there are so many resources and there are so many people who can help you right now. And I send you tremendous love, as I know so many others do as well. So may the divine be with you. May you remember how loved you are. May you remember that, and may you know that everything happens in divine timing when we allow ourselves to be connected to the miraculous beyond, because these heavens are opening up so much in so many ways for all of us. And the more that we open our hearts to receive, and the more we live from that heart, the more we're going to see and experience the miracles. Thank you so much for listening or watching or both the Karena, Virginia podcast, where we expect the best and get it. I look so forward to sharing more with you. Please do subscribe to YouTube so you know when the new podcast is out. And also stay tuned on Spotify and Apple. And may you have a blessed day wherever you are.